Hello everyone, I am the Man at Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from March of the Machine, Polukranos Reborn. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. But the very best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. There are plenty of perks for being a patron, such as early access to certain videos, exclusive deck techs, gifts, and more. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Polukranos is a 4/5 Hydra with reach for 3 green. Since it has an activated ability with white Phyrexian mana, it has a green-white color identity. Its front side isn't that interesting, which is why the deck is focused more on its completed side, which is what you get when you transform it. Polukranos Engine of Ruin is the actual commander of this deck, and more than likely everyone else's. It is now a Phyrexian and 6/6 with reach and lifelink. Whenever it or another non-token Hydra we control dies, we create a 3/3 green and white Phyrexian Hydra token with reach and another one with lifelink. In this sense, Polukranos is similar to Wurmcoil Engine, but it also makes your other non-token Hydras similar to Wurmcoil Engine, which makes this ability quite easy to abuse. Now you might think that sacrificing Hydras might be a good way to get these tokens. However, there's a much easier way to get them, all with minimal investment in mana, while also providing combo potential. This was the first thing that came to my mind when building Phyrexian Polukranos. I would run all of the X-cost 0/0 Hydras. Some of these being Capricorpian, Feral Hydra, Hungering Hydra, Mistcutter Hydra, Protean Hydra, Wildwood Scourge, and Rends 1 Hydra. While they're great on their own in a Hydra tribal deck like this one, what I cared about most is that they essentially only really cost 1 green mana. Once Polukranos is transformed, I can cast these for X equals 0 so that they don't enter with any +1/+1 counters on them. They immediately die as a state-based action, and I just got 2 3/3 Phyrexian Hydra tokens with keywords for a single green mana. Of course, you can still cast these as beaters and then have them die by other means afterwards, but casting them for X equals 0 has the potential of immediately filling up your board with 2 3/3s, but we'll see some of those effects later on. Genesis Hydra, Hooded Hydra, Neverwinter Hydra, Primordial Hydra, Steelbane Hydra, Vastfoot Hydra, and Lifeblood Hydra are the rest of these X-costed Hydras in the deck. Like the previous ones, they still have their uses, but are mostly here to get 3/3 Phyrexian Hydra tokens for incredibly cheap. These do cost more than 1 green mana, but it's still worth it for 2 or 3 green mana. It's a shame that Hydra Doodle is banned in Commander solely for being silver bordered. Nothing about this card is unmagic. In any case, it's a worse Neverwinter Hydra, but I digress. Another perk of these 14 Hydras being 0/0 creatures for cheap is thanks to Wild Pair. This card is absolutely busted with this idea of mine. When you cast these Hydras for X equals 0, they enter the battlefield as a 0/0. While they do die before the Wild Pair trigger resolves from the stack, you can still search your library for another 0/0 creature. You then put that creature onto the battlefield from your library for free. If it's a 0/0 Hydra, since it's entering without you having paid X, it'll also enter as a 0/0. You can thus trigger Phyrexian Polukranos twice for the price of 1 Hydra for potentially 1 green mana. However, you can also use Wild Pair to cheat in any creature with an even sum of power and toughness. Since you can pay whatever you want for X, you can choose how big that Hydra enters the battlefield. So if you wanted to cheat in one of the deck's utility creatures, you could. This is possibly one of the best tech cards in this entire deck. Do not sleep on this one. Mistveiled Plains is another amazing way to make the most of my Wild Pair strategy. Since the creature is dying as a state-based action before the Wild Pair trigger resolves, we can respond to that trigger by activating Mistveiled Plains, bottom decking the Hydra that just died. That way it's in our library and we can cheat it back out with Wild Pair. This way we have a nice cycle going without having to kill off too many Hydras. Since the deck is running all 7 fetch lands, make sure to fetch for Mistveiled Plains with any of the ones that can fetch for our plains. The deck is mostly green, so the only other white sources of mana are from Mistveiled Plains and the double typed lands in it. So once you have Mistveiled Plains, use any of the other fetch lands you can get for those double typed lands. Another way we'll be making the most of these 0/0 Hydras, I'm obviously running Anointed Procession, Doubling Season, Mondrak Glory Dominus, Parallel Lives, and Primal Vigor. These permanents make it even more tempting to cast those 0/0 Hydras for X equals 0, since you'll get twice as many tokens when you control Phyrexian Polukranos. Exponentially more the more of these effects you control at once. And thanks to Wild Pair, any 0/0 Hydra we cast for X equals 4 means that we can cheat in Mondrak from our library straight to the battlefield. The Hydra will enter with 4+1/+1 counters on it, giving it a power toughness sum of 8, same as Mondrak. Like I said, don't sleep on Wild Pair. As a bonus, Primal Vigor and Doubling Season also double the +1/+1 counters placed on our Hydras, which is probably why they're so expensive. You can still run the deck without these effects if they're too expensive for you, but it's pretty evident how busted they are here. As a bonus, Mondrak can become indestructible by sacrificing 2 creatures, which gives us another sacrifice outlet for Hydras. Speaking of sacrificing Hydras, these token doubling effects are also amazing because of the interaction between Ashlan's Altar and Nim Deathmantle. This combo is already infinite with just Phyrexian Polukranos, but with any token doubler we get an infinite amount of Phyrexian Hydra tokens very quickly. So let's see how it works. Suppose we already have Polukranos Engine of Ruin, Ashlan's Altar, Nim Deathmantle, and some non-token Hydra in play. We sacrifice that Hydra to the altar, getting 2 colorless mana. Both Polukranos and the Deathmantle trigger. Have Polukranos' trigger resolve first, creating the 2 Phyrexian Hydra tokens. Then, with the Deathmantle trigger still on the stack, sacrifice one of those tokens to get 2 colorless mana. That 4 mana will now pay for the Deathmantle trigger, getting the original Hydra back. Rinse and repeat and you get infinite Phyrexian Hydra tokens, enter the battlefield triggers, death triggers, etc. You can also get infinite colorless mana if you're sacrificing both Hydra tokens each time, all at instant speed. This combo is no joke, especially when used with a Hydra that has an enter the battlefield trigger like this one here. Whip-Tongue Hydra ensures that no one keeps any flyers. Anytime an opponent drops a flyer, just recur this Hydra to get rid of it. It also works with Hydras that have a death trigger, like Rampant Rejuvenator. It might be 0/0, but it always enters with at least 2 +1/+1 counters, so you can keep recurring it with this combo. Do this infinitely many times and you can get all of your basic lands from your library right onto the battlefield. If you had Crashing Drawbridge on the battlefield, then you can give your infinitely many tokens haste and win the game right then and there too. Granted, the Drawbridge can have summoning sickness, but you get the gist. We can also make the most of this combo with cards like Death's Presence and the Ozolith. However, we don't need the combo to make these good. Being able to transfer the +1/+1 counters of our dying Hydras is pretty powerful, since it almost makes our opponent's removal moot. The Ozolith is better one because it keeps the counters after a board wipe. The enchantment needs a creature to put them onto, so if they all die at once then you lose the counters, but it's still good to have redundancy. One final card that complements this casting 0/0 Hydras for X equals 0 strategy is Luminous Broodmoth. The Hydra enters without any +1/+1 counters and dies, but then comes back with a flying counter and still no +1/+1 counters on it, dying again as a state-based action. This gives us twice the Phyrexian Hydra tokens for just one casting. And any Hydras that do come back that won't die from state-based actions will now have a flying counter. This card is amazing here. Now that we saw some Demented Kirby level hijinxes with this commander, let's see some of the classic Hydra tribal fare. Oran Reef the Vastwood, Gavany Township, and Karn's Bastion are given in order to keep getting those +1/+1 counters on our creatures. Keep in mind that if you have a Hydra enter the battlefield as a 0/0, it will go to the graveyard before you can even respond to give it a +1/+1 counter due to state-based actions. That being said, these 3 lands are given here, more so since they don't take up spell slots in the deck. Colonial Hydra is along the same vein as Doubling Season and Primal Vigor in terms of doubling +1/+1 counters. However, it has to attack for that to happen. But that's fine, it already enters with at least 4 +1/+1 counters, and then they get doubled when it attacks the first time. Having trample makes it dangerous, and chances are that there's someone you can swing into and have it survive. And even if it doesn't, hopefully you have Phyrexian Polukranos to give you tokens for your trouble. Besides counters, you can also beef up your creatures thanks to Unnatural Growth and Zopandrel Hunger Dominus. Keep in mind that these permanents double the power and toughness of your creatures each combat. That means that even on an opponent's turn you get the buff, which might deter them from attacking into you. As a bonus, Zopandrel can become indestructible essentially for free, while also requiring you sacrifice 2 creatures to get that indestructible counter, all at instant speed. So not only does it become indestructible, but it also does so while sacrificing 2 Hydras, which could get you even more Hydra tokens. Synergy. Speaking of sacrifice outlets for value, look no further than Greater Good, Life's Legacy, and Momentous Fall. If the Hydras we're sacrificing is huge, then we can draw into a ton of cards. And we get those tokens from Phyrexian Polukranos. Unfortunately, only Greater Good is reusable since it's a permanent, but these spells still draw us tons of cards. Same with Garruk Primal Hunter, Return of the Wild Speaker, Rishkar's Expertise, and Soul's Majesty. These don't require sacrificing the creature, which might be better depending on the situation. They will still draw you a bunch of cards though. And as always, bonus points for casting either Return of the Wild Speaker or Soul's Majesty off of Rishkar's expertise. As for Garruk, you can do the same turn for 5 mana if you -3 him, essentially making him like a sorcery. However, you can wait a turn and +1 him first to keep him around. He does make a 3/3 token, which is fitting. His ultimate creates a ton of 6/6 worm tokens, so he has plenty of utility here. The deck still has other ways to draw cards such as Guardian Project and Tribute to the World Tree. The latter is absolutely insane here since it can trigger off of tokens, unlike the former. Since Phyrexian Polukranos' tokens are 3/3, they will draw us cards each time we create them, so we're essentially drawing 2 cards off of each trigger, meaning that we can draw as many cards as we want with the Ashen's Altar Nim Deathmantle combo. And if the creature were less than 3 power, it gets 2 +1/+1 counters on it instead. Keep in mind that this is a triggered effect, so you cannot cast a 0/0 Hydra for X = 0 and then have it get 2 +1/+1 counters. It will go to the graveyard before the trigger resolves, so keep that in mind. That being said, you can still choose X = 1 and have it survive, plus get extra counters. Around Frostfang, Tadius Juniper Ascendant, and Toski Bear of Secrets also draws cards, but from creatures getting through with combat damage. Tadius might be the worst of the 3 in terms of triggers, since it's only once per opponent instead of once per creature. However, recall that half of the tokens Phyrexian Polukrano creates have reach. That synergizes amazingly with Tadius since they will untap after attacking and can't be blocked by creatures with greater power. Absolutely busted. Oran Frostfang gives all of our attackers Death Touch, which is already amazing, but when paired with effects giving them trample, they become even more dangerous. Enter Nylea, God of the Hunt. Not only will Nylea give our creatures trample, but we can also sink mana into her to pump any creature +2/+2 each time. Her being 6/6 means that we can also cheat her onto the battlefield straight from our library with Wild Pair if we had an X = 6 Hydra enter the battlefield. Again, amazing enchantment. Or you can just use Rogue's Passage to make a huge beater outright unblockable. It doesn't take up a slot in the deck, and the colorless mana isn't that big of an issue in this deck. Going back to drawing insane amounts of cards, Reliquary Tower and Thought Vessel are included. The land doesn't take up a slot in the deck, and the mana rock is cheap enough that it's just good for being a 2 CMC mana rock. While the deck focuses primarily on land-based ramp, having this mana rock alongside Soul Ring shouldn't be an issue. They're the only 2 mana rocks, so any artifact-based board wipe shouldn't set us back at all. As for mana acceleration, the deck is running your standard fare of land-based ramp like Bitterthorn, Nissus Animus, Sword of the Animist, and Sword of Hearth and Home. The deck will always have some creature trying to swing in, so getting these triggers shouldn't be an issue. While Sword of Hearth and Home needs to connect, it isn't that big of a deal since it gives +2/+2 and protection from 2 relevant colors. As a bonus, it also blinks a creature, so blinking a Hydra that would enter as a 0/0 is another good way to get some Phyrexian Hydra tokens. Farseek, Nature's Lore, 3 visits into the north, and Rampant Growth also get lands straight onto the battlefield and for very cheap since they all cost 2 to cast. Due to running into the north, all of the basic forests in the deck are snow covered. Wayfarer's Bauble and Navigation Orb are also cheap to cast but require mana along with tapping and sacrificing, so their overall costs are higher. However, they can still be cast very early on, which is why they're included. Nykthos Shrine to Nyx and Yamavaya Cradle of Growth are amazing lands here, especially Nykthos. The deck is more than half green, so this is going to tap down for a ton of green mana. Yavimaya helps with color fixing, which is important as well. Although the only white mana sources in the deck are from the dual type lands and Mistveiled Plains, since the deck is mostly green. So those fetch lands come in clutch. And once you have all of your white mana lands, you can tap the fetch lands for green thanks to Yavimaya. Gargoyle's Vicious Watcher and Kodama of the West Tree are some creature-based mana acceleration effects just like the previously mentioned Rampant Rejuvenator. Gargoyles helps our Hydras cost 4 generic last to cast, which is nothing to scoff at. If we choose X = 4, we still only pay colored costs on our 0/0 Hydras. However, we can also just choose X = 0 if we want to keep on the main strategy. So Gargoyles gives us options depending on the situation. If that weren't enough, whenever any creature we control becomes the target of a spell, Gargoyles fights any creature we don't control. All on an 8/7 with Vigilance. So this thing will always be hitting hard. Plus it makes opponents think twice about targeting any of our creatures with kill spells. Since +1/+1 counters are an inevitability in a deck like this one, Kodama does a ton of work in ramping us basics. Whenever those Hydras with counters on them deal combat damage, we get to ramp for our snow-covered forest for each creature that connected. Absolute madness. The final spells in the deck are the much needed interaction. No deck should be without interaction, and this one is no exception. While we benefit from our non-token Hydras dying, sometimes we want to keep our massive board. So Clever Concealment, Teferi's Protection, Flawless Maneuver, Heroic Intervention, and Rapid Vigor do just that. The best thing about Phyrexian Hydra tokens is that they're both green and white, so we can tap them down to convoke Clever Concealment, essentially making it a free way to phase out our board. Flawless Maneuver is also free to cast if we control Polukranos. These free spells are amazing when opponents see us tapped out. Rapid Vigor won't give us indestructibility, but fewer and fewer board wipes don't have a can't regenerate clause, so this will protect our creatures from a board wipe more often than not. As for our own removal, Beast Within and Generous Gift will always get the job done. And who cares if the opponent gets a 3-3? We have a ton of 3-3s of our own. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running Temple Garden, Canopy Vista, Scattered Groves, Arctic Tree Line, Radiant Grove, and Ancient Tomb, as well as 13 snow-covered forests to make the most of all the basic land ramp effects and into the north. It is not running Command Tower because it is infetchable and the deck is mostly green, so the only few white sources can be fetched for with the previously mentioned fetch lands, which is why all of the white sources in the deck are fetchable. As with all of my deck techs, you can build your mana base according to your budget. Whether you include more expensive cards or even cheaper cards is up to you. You do you. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Polukranos Reborn. I'm glad I approached this commander from outside of the box in terms of how to play it. Getting a bunch of 3-3s for just 1 green mana is so powerful that you have the choice of either casting those 0/0 Hydras for X equals 0, or you could potentially sink a lot of mana into them to go tall. The deck also has combo potential, so you can either swing in with a handful of huge player-ending threats or a game-ending army. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link, that also helps out the channel. I also want to thank everyone for being so patient and understanding while I recovered from my illness. It is very much appreciated. As always, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Kirby, and happy brewing.